What is going on, Panthers Nation? Carolina Dad here, your host of the Growls One Roar podcast. Hey, folks, background, I'm in the guest room having Wi-Fi issues, but that's okay because we are here to continue our series on breaking down the 90-man roster heading into training camp. If you have not had a chance, you can go out and watch the first video where I went through quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers. If you have not had a chance, you can go out and watch the first video where I discuss quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers. Busy, crowded rooms, but today we're going to move on and talk about tight ends and the offensive line. I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. Jumping right in, we're going to look at Jordan Matthews, tight end, 6'3", 212 pounds. Appeared, I believe, in one game last year, but didn't see a lot of production with the Carolina Panthers. Jumping right in, we're going to look at Jordan Matthews, 6'3", 212 pounds tight end, who spent most of his career with the Philadelphia Eagles, has been a practice squad guy for the Carolina Panthers. You can see on here a lot of his production early on in his career. I mean, he had a fantastic start with the Philadelphia Eagles. In his fourth season, moved to Buffalo. 2018, 2019, back with the Eagles, fell off, didn't have a lot of production, and hasn't been in a game, or at least provided, I should say, has not been in the game, but hasn't been the tight end, the pass-catching tight end that he was in Philadelphia. I look at him coming into this year as someone that's probably a fringe cut. Honestly, it depends on how many tight ends we plan to keep. And if I look at the room today, I would say Tommy Tremble, Ian Thomas, JaMarvin Sanders are your three safe. Last year, Dave Canales, they carried three tight ends in Tampa. It would make sense that they're going to do the same thing this year. So right now, Jordan Matthews looking like a fringe cut player or potentially practice squad. And or at this point, he's 31 years old, which is how old I am. But they may just decide, hey, this is the point that we want to move on. Next up, we're going to look at our rookie playmaking pass-catching tight end, JaMarvin Sanders, out of the University of Texas. You can see here his stats from the 2022-2023 season at the University of Texas. 54 receptions, 613 yards, 5 touchdowns in 22. 45 receptions, 682 yards, 2 touchdowns in the 2023 campaign. Coming over alongside his teammate Brooks, 6'4", 252 pounds. We've discussed him at length coming into this year, where, looking at the actual draft itself, when he was on one of my boards and in a lot of my mocks. Heading into day 3, I said Panthers have to take him. Excited because he probably is the second best tight end in the draft, and you get him in the 4th round. This year, hard to know where he's going to fit in. I could see him playing a little more in the slot. We know right now, at least coming in, I think one of the downsides is his blocking or inability to block. But at the same time, we need a pass-catching, playmaking tight end out of this group, and I'd look for him to get the ball and, hey, maybe develop something alongside Bryce Young, giving him that security. I do think this is a pick for the future, as were a lot of these offensive picks in this year's draft. When you look at Xavier Legette, Jonathan Brooks, and JaMarvin Sanders, I think they're for the future for Bryce Young and to develop alongside him. Looking into this year, hard to sit down and predict what his production will be because I just don't know where he's going to slot into the roster yet. And I think it's Tommy Tremble's job as number 1 right now. Ian Thomas is good at blocking and shown flashes in minicamp and OTAs. I think this year, if you looked at 200 to 300 receiving yards, that would be a successful year. We really haven't seen a 500-yard catching tight end since Greg Olsen. It's been quite a while. So I'd love for that to be like year 2, year 3. But this year, with us dispersing the ball and or being run heavy, I'm going to kind of go a little bullish or lower, I should say, on my initial prediction. Next up, we have Steven Sullivan, 6'5", 245 pounds. Originally picked by Seattle, but landed here in Carolina. He was a 7th-round pick out of Seattle. Last year was his most productive year in the NFL, 12 receptions, 125 yards, 10.4 yards per catch, and 5 first downs. Didn't really do much in 21 or 22. In the 2020 season, I'm guessing he was out on the practice squad. I don't have it put up for Seattle. So, hey, potential ties to Dave Canales there if they drafted him. And maybe there's just something with Sullivan. We did see him make plays in spurts. Again, none of these tight ends, as far as who was here last year, were really knocking the socks off with receiving yards and yards after catch and like a true number one tight end. So important to have a pass catching tight end in the NFL these days. We've seen the success and how it helps quarterbacks and the development of quarterbacks. So I would look for Sullivan right now. I think it's really going to be, if we keep four tight ends, I think between Sullivan and Matthews, I think Sullivan has a little bit of an edge because he's younger right now. But you could look at Sullivan as being a potential cut casualty heading into this year. Next on our list, we got our man Ian Thomas, 6'4", 260 pounds, former fourth-round pick, of course, with the Carolina Panthers. He's had, his rookie season was his best season. That was the only season he got over 300 yards in a season, had 2 touchdowns. Since then, we've seen his production decline. The other thing, Frank Reich carried 5 tight ends last year. I don't see us carrying that many just based off the Canales system and offense. But since then, things have kind of dwindled. 136, 145, 188, 197, then 56 last year. Last year was by far his worst season as a pass-catching tight end, but he's still here. Now, as you heard me reference, he's made plays in OTAs and minicamp. I don't know if that'll translate into success on the year. I'm pulling for him. I mean, the guys continue to take pay cuts. So if you're going to take a pay cut and you want to show your loyalty to be with this team, I'm going to support it. For me personally, if we start talking about surprise cuts, maybe you would call this a surprise cut. I don't know. Some fans probably would say, when is he going to get cut? Hard to say, man. I do think you're going to see him here next year just based off of the tight ends that we have on the roster and his years of experience and what he can do from a blocking perspective. I'm not even going to predict his stat line because what is there to predict, and why would I want to even predict that? Last tight end in the group, Tommy Tremble, 6'4", 250 pounds, former third-round pick out of Notre Dame, who's, had some spurts here, but honestly, similar stat lines, not much better than Ian Thomas when you compare them year over year. Most receptions in a season was last year, 23 receptions, 194 yards, just shy of 200, 3 touchdowns. He is a very good red zone threat. Last year I was like, it's going to be a breakout year. And I think I threw like 300, 400, 500 yard predictions. I don't think we'll see that either. I don't think any tight end is going to hit 500. I think 200 to 300. But if Tommy really is going to take that next step in his career, this is the time to do it. He's still young. He's only 24 years old, entering his 4th season in the NFL. I think there's a lot of good with Tommy, his durability. He's a great teammate. He's been spoken highly of by Dave Canales this offseason. And I think and hope that maybe we get to see him take that next step this year and become the pass-catching, playmaking tight end that we want. And maybe 350, 400 yards. I think 400 yards, that'd be doubling his career average, 4 to 5 touchdowns. When I start throwing out touchdown numbers, though, I'm like, so we're going to be saying Bryce is throwing, 35, 40 touchdowns, which is part of the reason, to give a true prediction, I got to sit down and, let's dissect who's getting these touchdowns from Bryce. If I'm predicting Bryce is throwing 25 to 30-ish in that range. Well, folks, that's going to do it for your tight ends. Next, we are going to move on to the offensive line. The offensive line is the last position group that we are going to be talking about on the offensive side of the ball, and we have a lot to get into. There are going to be some cuts, some guys that are retained on the practice squad. Man, you got Austin Corbett, your new center, Andrew Rame, undrafted free agent, center, who's the only person on the roster or player on the roster that has actually played center in their life. Snapped the ball out of Oklahoma. Brady Christensen, J.D. Dorenzo, Robert Hunt, Nash Jensen, Damian Lewis, Cade Mays, Chandler Zavala, Jeremiah Crawford, undrafted free agent rookie, Christian Duffy, Ike Ekwonu, Ricky Lee, Taylor Moton, Yash Nijman, Badara Traore. Big guys. I was looking at their 6'7" measurements. We're going to jump right in. We're going to do this thing alphabetically, and boy, do we have a list to go through. Let's get right into it. Jumping right in, let's talk about the center, the newly appointed center for the Carolina Panthers, and that is Austin Corbett. The man has not played center in the NFL. I know there was that time in Cleveland, backup situation, preseason. This is different, man. We're talking about NFL staff. Fuck. Next on our list, fuck. First up on our list, we have Austin Corbett, the newly appointed center for the Carolina Panthers all offseason once Bradley Bozeman was released, maybe even before he was released. Panthers fans did want a center. They wanted us to draft or pick someone up in free agency. It didn't happen in free agency. So then fans said, oh my gosh, there's this stout draft class of centers. We're going to pick one up. We have the picks to do so, and they did not do it. So here we are left with Austin Corbett. We heard it all offseason through OTAs, through minicamp, even before that he was going to be the guy, that he looked good. But I just finished an interview with Mike Kay of the Charlotte Observer, and we were talking about this. And, if he was a stout center and clear-cut center, don't you think he would have played center before this? This is going to be his first time. So this team is rolling the dice, which I said is fine, because I've talked about, hey, you're not going to solve everything in this offseason. You got him on the last year of his contract. Maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't work out. Either way, it's an easy plan for you to move on. But he's your guy. And in the interior, we've heard he looks fast. We heard he looks good, but we haven't seen him, real live action. We're talking about no pads out here moving around, getting on and off blocks. We are going to learn a lot in the preseason. And I'm pulling for him. I'm pulling for him because I really like him as a player, as a Panther, as an offensive lineman. Things haven't worked out because of the injury, and that's also where you're going to have in the back of your mind the injuries. Is he going to be able to stay healthy? We can only hope so. Speaking of centers, we do have an undrafted free agent rookie out of Oklahoma, Andrew Rame. Right now, as I look at the 53-man roster, unless he just comes out and hits it out the park, impresses, makes a strong case that he could push for the starting center role, I don't see him as someone that will make the 53-man roster. I mean, just look at the number of offensive linemen, and we're probably going to keep 9. We're also going to be looking for backups that can play multiple positions. And Andrew Rame is one of those guys that, he's a center. Now, there is some upside to it. I do think we are able to retain him on the practice squad, and we just hope nobody picks him up. But at least you have him in the waiting should things go haywire and just not work out at all for Austin Corbett as he's at center. So, hey, we get into the preseason. I would expect him to get a lot of snaps, a lot of reps, stay healthy, and have a chance to, hey, maybe show some folks what he can do. Moving on, we have Brady Christensen, 6'6", 300 pounds, former third-round pick of the Carolina Panthers in 21. Brady's going to be technically the backup center again when we talk about a player who can play multiple positions. Backup center right now, we know he's getting some snaps. We also know interior on the offensive line. He's going to be a backup right now as it stands. But in my mind, I think it's clear he'll make the roster. I don't have any doubts about it. Given his versatility and that, if someone goes down, that he could step up, and he is a starting caliber. He's just had some setback with injuries. I think he will be okay, and he'll have a spot on this team. Next up, we got J.D. Dorenzo. Experience. He's had 1 year in the league, so heading into his second year out of Rutgers. I mean, we get into a lot of these names where these were undrafted guys, practice squad guys last year because of the decimation on the offensive line. we just saw all kinds of guys getting in the rotation or being called up at points last year in the season, and this is one of those guys. For me, I do think he could be a casualty when we start talking about cuts. Again, I haven't, really pinned down my 53-man roster yet. That'll come later in a few weeks. But for now, I do think he is going to be borderline, considering, again, the talent that we have. Next up, we have what could be considered the biggest signing of the offseason in Robert Hunt, 6'6", 323 pounds, excelled with the Miami Dolphins, and we saw that very athletic interior offensive line that hopefully, when paired along with Damian Lewis and Austin Corbett, it's going to give our man Bryce Young some time to throw and the ability to step up in the pocket. So I've heard, various takes because that's all I listen to is media, and it's good and bad for me. I guess it's all good, whatever. But you hear things, and I did hear a take that was like, well, what if he's kind of a one-hit wonder, and what we saw in Miami doesn't translate to success in Carolina, which is a valid, like, what if he's just a product of the system, the scheme with Mike McDaniel? I hope that's not the case, but you did give him a lot of money, and there's always risk involved. You got to pay players, but giving someone a massive contract, and I've also seen some people say that they think we overpaid. But for me personally, I'm a fan of it. I'm excited to have him here, and I can't wait to see what he does in helping Bryce Young develop this year and giving him time to throw the ball. We move on to Nash Jensen, undrafted free agent that, again, saw time last year. All around decimation to that line. It was just a rotation at the guard position last year. For me, I think Nash is another one of those guys, like, borderline making the 53-man roster and or being on the practice squad. It's just the nature of the business. I do think I remember him from camp last year as, one of the guys that went around signing a bunch of autographs. Really good guy out of North Dakota State. Another big acquisition on the offensive line, Damian Lewis. I talked about him being a possible connection for the Panthers with his ties to Dave Canales during their time in Seattle. Sure enough, he comes and he lands here, and he helps us out on the left side, Hunt on the right side. That interior is all we've talked about, and it's the theme of the offseason for the Panthers outside of Ike Ekwonu, which we'll get to. But I'm excited. 6'2", 327, a little bit smaller than our man Robert Hunt, but comes with another big payday, not nearly as big as Robert Hunt, but a solid payday. And, he's shown success there in Seattle. And, having somewhat, I know it's, it wasn't Dave Canales' offense in Seattle, but likely some of those themes carry over into what Canales has built since, Canales spent 10, 12, 13 years in Seattle before making the move to Tampa. So, parts of that scheme and offense and terminology have to carry over. Again, as we talked about the Rashad Penny hire as well. He's solid. Going to make the roster. Next up, Cade Mays, man, former 6th-round pick who's had his ups and downs. 6'6", 325 pounds. For me, right now, I do think he is another borderline player that could get cut. I don't know that it would be a surprise cut, but we do have to whittle this thing down. We know who our starters are going to be with Icky, Lewis, Corbett, Hunt, and Taylor Moton. You throw in a Yash, that gets you to 6. You throw in a Brady Christensen, that gets you to 7. You're talking about 2 more guys out of however many more that we got on here, not 8-ish probably to talk through. It's going to be tough, man. It's going to be a very good battle. I do think a few of these guys, again, like I said, get carried over to the practice squad. I just don't know how many. Speaking of players, we have Chandler Zavala, 6'3", 322, saw time at both guard positions last year, had an unfortunate injury, turned out to be okay, but, he missed some time last year. We all thought, hey, there's, you go back and listen to me. I had him mocked in my final mock of the 23 draft in the position we picked him, and that's exactly where we picked him. I hit on it, which is cool. But he had a tough year, man. And I think we all thought, oh, he's going to have Icky paired with Zavala. One, they barely played together in college. So I think we over indexed that there was this like camaraderie there, or that they were just going to be like this tandem. He is someone that's going to be, on this cut line. I just gave you 7 players that I feel confident are going to be on the roster. Similar to Zavala, even though he's heading into his second year, there's a strong possibility that he is a practice squad player next year. You heard it here first. Now we'll get into quite a few undrafted free agent rookies, starting with Jeremiah Crawford, 6'5", 315 out of UTSA. And I don't have a lot of information to give on you. We're starting to get into some of the practice squad bodies with second, third string as we get into camp. We saw last year, though, some of these undrafted free agents ended up making the practice squad and then seeing time at some point. So, hey, you never know when the opportunity is going to knock and when you're going to get called up. Another one, Christian Duffy out of Kansas State, 6'5", 300 pounds, offensive tackle. Not much to share about him either. He's another guy that I think there is more depth on the offensive line this year. And it's hard for me to imagine some of these undrafted guys making it over some of the established players that are here when we talk about those last 2 spots. The player that may be under the most pressure outside of Bryce Young is Ike Ekwonu, heading into year 3, 6'4", 320 pounds, NC State, former first-round pick, sixth overall. 6th overall first-round pick left tackle should be a franchise left tackle that can sustain you for 10 years. And, his rookie season sure looked like it. Last year was terrible. And then you come into this offseason and hear that he was riding the coattails of his rookie year in his second year. And I'll never get over the fact that we did not have leadership either from the coaching staff or veterans on this team and in the locker room to get him straight, to straighten him out, like level set. It's tough, man. It's a big year for him. I think there's pressure, which we'll talk about with Josh being behind, because there is a possibility he could be replaced. I think it's Ike's starting job, and he would just have to bomb this thing out. But there is, as Canales likes to say, he likes to have guys behind that can apply pressure to these starters and get better at every position. If he does not pan out, we are going to be talking about drafting a tackle next year, which hopefully, nobody wants to do that coming off here after selecting a first rounder, or looking at this via free agency. And I know there's also folks who probably say, well, when you look at Brady Christensen at left tackle, there's folks that have wanted that for quite a while, and you never know. Never know if that's going to be a possibility, but lots of pressure for Icky. Next up, we have Ricky Lee. I always like to represent the North Carolina schools in South Carolina, but 6'5", 289, a little bit slimmer offensive lineman out of North Carolina A&T. Aggie Pride represents. Grew up in Greensboro, so I always like to shout out that as well. Ricky Lee is one of those sneaky guys that showed a little promise last year in spurts. Not saying that he was a clear-cut starter, but I think he's someone, as we group in those last 2 spots, he's one that I would have on my list, if you're creating a list, to watch to see if he will make that cut. One of the best or most sturdiest pieces of the offensive line, Taylor Moton, 6'5", 325 pounds. He's the highest paid player on the Carolina Panthers, making nearly $30 million. Well-deserved, former second-round pick. It's a big year for him, contract year. I, as a couch GM, kept thinking at some point they would renegotiate his contract or restructure, and it never happened. So the Panthers are paying him. So it's a contract prove-it year. He'll be 30 years old next year, actually be 30 years old heading into the season, August 18th. So he'll be 31 heading, looking at next year as a free agent, which is a little bit up there. Not to say it's not old, because that's younger than me, but from NFL terms for offensive linemen, a little bit older in age. So he's got a lot to prove. I think the Panthers did him right. by not making, taking a pay cut or doing anything, but also not extending and or restructuring, because a lot of people are like, just, hey, I hit the little button on the GM tool online and you know what? I got this extension and we saved this much cap space. You just push the problem down the road. So the Panthers are making a conscious effort. Dan Morgan, Brant Tillis, hey, we're going to pay him his money, and then next year we'll regroup and see where we land. Maybe that helps in good faith too with his potential contract if he does come back for another year or two. Like, hey, we just paid you $30 million. You want to take a little bit of a pay cut here? Next, we have Josh Nijman, 6'7", 314, heading into his 5th season. So he showed some promise in Green Bay and then a drop in production as far as snaps. I saw someone tweeting out the percentage of pressure that he gave up in comparison to Icky. Like, dude, he had 1,000 less snaps than Icky over the span of the last 2 years. His numbers are going to look a bit better. That said, I think he has been brought in. I mean, I don't think there's anyone worried about Taylor Moton unless there was an injury. Knock on wood, we don't want that. But really brought in for pressure and applying pressure to Icky Ekwonu. In the event that Icky does not perform, you have a reliable option of someone that can come in and help you. And that's exactly what we didn't have this depth last year, as you saw us running through, if you followed the team, running through all these picks, undrafted free agents and, pulling guys off the street to come play guard. Last up, we have Badara Traore, offensive tackle, 6'7", 320, another big guy out of LSU, 1 year of experience heading into his 2nd season. And no expectations for me for him as well. I think practice squad is my final projection. Anyways, folks, that's going to do it for the offensive line. If you're following this video series, next up, we'll move to the defensive side of the ball. But until then, y'all have a good one.